Hi friends, and welcome to another Friday Facebook Live. I'm Taylor and this is Nick, and today we're joining you from in front of our Amazon Flooded Forest exhibit. And today is Friday, which means Aquarium After Dark is happening tonight.
What?
And for the month of October, each Friday night is going to have a different theme. And today is our first theme night. So in honor of our first theme night, we thought we would share some science vocabulary with you today. And you might be wondering at this point, what's tonight's theme? Well, it is all about nocturnal animals. Some of you might be familiar with the term nocturnal. For those of you who aren't, hang tight. We're going to define it for you in just a few moments. But did you know there are a whole slew of words that describe the different times of day that animals are awake and on the go versus sleeping? Did you know that, Nick?
You know, I did know that.
I knew you knew that because we wrote this presentation together. But we thought we would go ahead and define some of those words for you, share a little bit of information so you're prepped and ready to go for Nocturnal Animal Night. What do you think, Nick? Sounds like a plan?
Sounds like a good idea to me. Yeah, let's educate the masses, shall we?
All right, there won't be a test at the end of this presentation, so don't worry. But Nick is going to start us off by telling us just what those names are called. There's a big group of them, and what's the name of the group?
That's right.
Because I had to learn this to do this presentation.
There was a lot to learn, wasn't there?
It was a learning curve this week, friends.
That's
it was.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, so as Taylor was mentioning, a lot of you are probably familiar with the term nocturnal, but that's not the only way to describe the activity patterns of animals because they're not all nocturnal, as Taylor was mentioning. So the classification that we use to refer to the different activity patterns of animals is called Diel activity patterns. That's not dial like the dial tone on your cell phone or like the wonderful soap products, of which I bought some last night for myself. But that's D-I-E-L, Diel activity patterns. And basically, this is a way to classify the different activity patterns of animals like Taylor was discussing. It's generally defined as of or relating to a 24-hour period, and that's especially during like a regular daily cycle. Now, in our case, that means the times that animals are active during their sort of period, during the day. Diel activity patterns are actually an animal adaptation, and if you guys are a fan of Facebook Lives, then you've learned a little bit about animal adaptations and some of the other amazing adaptations our animals have here at the aquarium. Diel activity patterns can vary seasonally or regionally for the same species, and they can be affected by things like temperature, precipitation, or even human presence. This is where it gets pretty heavy. You ready? So typically, they reflect a compromise between foraging for food, resting, avoiding predators, competition for resources, social activities, and other environmental factors. That's a lot of variables to consider when adapting to an activity pattern. All these things together cause an animal to be most active during a particular time of the day. So let's talk a little bit more about some of those specific classifications. Taylor already briefly mentioned nocturnal. There are 4 primary ones, and to start with, Taylor's going to get us going here.
Yeah, so we thought it made sense to start with nocturnal since tonight's theme is all about nocturnal animals. And for those of you who are familiar, this is not going to be a surprise, but for those of you who this is a brand new term, nocturnal animals are animals that are awake at night, hence our theme, and rest during the day. So in the ocean, this can mean animals like sharks, eels, lobsters, an animal that lives in this tank behind me that you can learn about this evening. And these are animals that are typically taking advantage of the dark to hunt prey items. So they're using the cover of darkness in order to sneak up on their prey. This also means that a lot of animals that hunt nocturnally are animals that don't rely on their eyesight as their primary method for seeking out prey. So you guys might remember, oh gosh, what is that? Almost month, 2 months ago at this point, where we did our presentation about electroreception in sharks. Remember, this helps them locate prey through special organs in their head where they can sense items even if they can't see it, which would be particularly useful in low light or no light situations. The next, probably most common diel activity pattern is diurnal. And diurnal animals are animals that are awake during the day and sleep at night. Think humans. But if we're talking about, again, marine species, you can think of many types of reef fish, sea turtles like myrtle, penguins, and in fact, Nick and I were talking about this morning. Probably most of the animals that you're going to come and see at the aquarium are diurnal animals. Now, it is possible that these animals adapted to this particular activity pattern and were, in fact, at one point not diurnal, but things like light or daytime temperatures actually influence them towards that activity pattern. So again, remember, these things are kind of comprised of a lot of different factors that will determine kind of when an animal is active. And remember, these things can shift and change, again, based on season or where the animals are located. So nocturnal, diurnal, but there's two more. Nick, would you like to talk about the next one?
Sure. Let's keep going here.
Okay.
I do have one thing to add about diurnal animals.
Okay, yeah.
Taylor knows it's coming. That's why she's already laughing. This has not been scientifically proven, but I think it's fair to say that diurnal animals might also prefer to be really tan, and so they like to be out when the sun is at its highest.
I think
it's just a theory I have. It's not been proven.
My theory is that Nick is referring to one very specific diurnal animal.
This particular animal didn't do very good this summer, but hopefully next summer.
There you go.
Anyway, okay, we've learned about nocturnal activity patterns, diurnal activity patterns. The next one is an amazing word. It's called crepuscular activity patterns. This basically refers to animals that are active during the twilight hours, dawn and dusk. There's one particular example of a crepuscular animal that us humans are very familiar with and has a bit of a popularity problem. That's a mosquito. You think about mosquitoes, they're often very active at dawn, particularly at dusk as well. That's when you need to put your mosquito repellent on. This strategy might prove very valuable for animals that are trying to balance access to light and possibly avoidance of daytime temperatures like high heat. For example, in a desert habitat, that might be a place where animals really have to find that balance between not exposing themselves too much to really high heat levels, but also needing some access to light. It's also been shown that animals might adapt to a crepuscular activity pattern if they started out using sort of a diurnal activity pattern and something sort of put them at risk in that time of day. Maybe vulnerability to predators or something else. And so they may have actually adapted and changed that pattern in the way that Taylor and I have been discussing, change things around just to make it more likely that they'd be able to survive and avoid things like predators.
Feels important.
It's kind of important, right? Yeah. Scientists have also observed some ocean predators, animals like barracudas and jacks, and some species of sharks, do their hunting around twilight hours, dawn and dusk, a crepuscular activity pattern, as they are moving from a daytime to a nighttime habitat. Perhaps they'd be resting during the day in one area and they're moving to another area to spend their nights in a particular habitat. Along the way, they might stop off, grab a fish or two. You know, kind of like the way that we stop off for takeout on the way home. You know, when we're coming home from work, right? Just grab some food on the way. So that's another example of a crepuscular activity pattern. And there's still one more activity pattern to talk about. This one is pretty interesting as well. Taylor, take us away here.
Yeah, this one's a doozy.
Yeah.
So the final diel activity pattern is called Cathemoral.
Woo!
Woo, there's a word.
Yeah.
Cathemoral animals are active during spurts of time during both day and night. Again, these can shift seasonally based on daylight hours, and they also usually include both day and nighttime hours. This means the animals will be active at different spurts of time and will sleep at different spurts of time over that 24-hour period. Now, cathemeral animals also will kind of mix things up. Those spurts can change, so they could be awake longer during the day or sometimes be awake longer during the night. So
unpredictable, right?
Yeah, as our colleague Lorna likes to call them, these are your unpredictable weirdos. Now, they might not be completely unpredictable. If you study them long enough, you might be able to kind of figure out what their patterns are, but they certainly keep scientists and animal watchers on their toes. Now, for these guys, I had a bit of a challenge trying to find a cathemeral marine animal example, but after some digging, I was able to determine that there are some populations of sea otters and seals that are thought to be cathemeral. So there you go, your unpredictable weirdos, sea otters. Not totally surprising.
No. That's amazing, though. You did some serious digging on that one.
I did. We read a lot of scientific journals for this particular presentation. We learned a lot. So since we have learned a lot, I hope you have learned a lot. And at this point, let's keep the learning rolling. Do we have any questions out there this morning from our Facebook Live viewers, Marissa? Is hibernation a type of dial activity pattern? Whoa.
That's a good question. I got to be honest. I don't think I came across this when I was doing my research. I don't know if you did, Taylor. Maybe we can tag team this one. Do you have an idea about?
Yeah, so I think probably the best way to answer this is hibernation is not necessarily a dial activity pattern, but a shift in an animal's dial activity pattern. So we talked about how lots of things can change when an animal is active, and we mentioned that this can happen seasonally, and I think hibernation is probably a perfect example of a seasonal shift for an animal. So an animal that might typically be diurnal might, during a certain season, become cathemeral because of things like it's really cold outside, so they want to save energy, and they can do that by resting much longer hours during a day. How did I do, Nick?
That's better than I was going to describe it.
Great.
But I agree with you. Yeah, I was just thinking while you were talking about that, Taylor. Maybe an example of an animal that we have here at the aquarium would be our lungfish. We have lungfish in a few different exhibits, and these animals actually do this amazing thing. I believe it's called estivation. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
And that's their version of hibernation, where they sort of bury themselves in the muddy sediment and rest and wait for conditions to be more appropriate for them to be able to feed and live and survive. And I remember this story because there's kind of a really interesting aspect to the story. So apparently, lungfish that live in South America would go into this estivation period, and some of the native peoples living in that area would be building their houses by creating bricks out of the mud in the places where they lived. And sometimes they would make these bricks and they'd build their houses. Then it would rain and it would sort of erode some of the bricks, and all of a sudden a lungfish would pop out from one of those bricks, right? Isn't that wild? Can you imagine fish raining down from your walls?
Lungfish in your cereal bowl.
Man.
It's a rough morning.
Anyway, that got us off on a nice tangent. That was a good question.
That was a great question.
Do we have any other questions, Marissa?
Nothing right now.
Okay. Well, we'll keep talking for a little bit here, and if anything pops up, Marissa, definitely let us know. What's that? What's the tank behind us? Yeah. So Taylor was mentioning this at the beginning. This is our Amazon flooded forest exhibit, and we chose this tank because there's a particular animal here that is nocturnally active, and I don't want to give any more away other than that, because if you attend our aquarium at night Friday tonight, you're going to learn a little bit more about that animal. But this would be a good place to start your hunt, looking for animals that are active at nighttime. Yeah. Okay. Oh, do moon phases affect diurnal activity? The answer is yes, they do indeed. Moon phases, as you folks probably know because you're so smart, also affect things like tides, right? And that's going to have an impact on the activity of animals living in the ocean. So for sure, they might cause an animal to shift their activity period. It might be subtle. It might be that they're active at one time of night and that moves to a different time of night because of the lunar cycle. Or they might actually shift to be, rather than nocturnally active, crepuscularly active, or even diurnally active, depending on the cycle. It depends a little bit on the type of habitat they might use and how that's affected by the lunar phase, right?
Exactly.
Would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I think, remember, one of the things that drives diurnal activity pattern is food availability, and actually phases of the moon can cause animals to act a little bit differently during either different times of year or just different times during the month. And so there might be some really appealing food items because of a moon phase that would then influence when an animal would be active during the day, especially if they particularly enjoy that food item.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right on.
Great question.
You know what this made me think of, Taylor?
What?
That we probably should save for another Facebook Live because it's so amazing. We didn't even talk about the host of animals living in the ocean that during the daytime start way down here, and then the nighttime they come all the way up to the surface and do things. And then when the sun starts to rise again, they go all the way down thousands of feet deep.
I think that would be a very cool Facebook Live.
Let's cut it right there. That's all you're going to get.
Vertical migration.
That's all you're going to get. Vertical migration. Stay tuned.
Awesome. Any other questions out there this morning, Marissa? Perfect. Well, I think at this point, Nick, let's sign it off. Do you want to wrap us up?
Let's wrap it up here. Yeah. So as always, guys, if you do think of any other additional questions, be sure to put them in the Facebook comments, and Taylor and I and lots of other smart people here at the aquarium will do our best to answer. It's time for our test. Everyone get out your number 2 pencils. Just kidding.
Nick, we promised them there wouldn't be a test.
Just kidding, no test today. Hopefully you learned a little bit more about how we categorize the activity patterns of animals. You might be wondering, why is this such a big deal? Well, understanding these activity patterns and how they fit with different animals helps scientists and conservationists understand things like when is a good time of day to observe this animal for learning purposes, when is it going to be active, and for conservationists, that's going to help them understand what kind of ocean threats might be impacting a particular animal because of when they are active and what's influencing when they're active. So these are really important pieces of information. And it, like we mentioned during our presentation here, it should also help those of you attending our aquarium at night tonight look around the building and find some of these animals that might be active nocturnally.
Hey-o.
So hopefully we'll see you tonight. There'll also be some special signage up around the building as well, like we mentioned. So for all you diurnally active folks out there, have an active rest of your day, and we'll see you really soon for a future Facebook Live. Take care.
Bye, friends.